A History, Part 2, Mirror's End. Queen Xitalia stood upon the first step of a majestically spiralling staircase, gloriously curving its way all the way up into the clouds. It was entirely possible it led to some darkly mysterious star, but who could say for sure when the future lay obscured by the impenetrable fog of so much time and space. Xitalia was a Xylenian queen, a first-generation queen who now found herself standing at the edge of one life while peering apprehensively into the fragile promise of another. Eternity beckoned, but eternity was a dangerous place, littered with cruel and insidious traps, lying in wait to ensnare and deny the unwary. Nest Xitalia, still in relative infancy, was at last nearing the end of its first generational cycle. Against all odds, it had survived, in a world relentlessly determined to take everything it had worked so hard to build, including its very future. Queen Xitalia supposed she had been more than a little bit lucky to have made it so far, and certainly her reign looked far more secure now than it had in the past. But luck alone meant next to nothing, without the wheels of wisdom and cunning to guide it. The Queen had certainly proven herself to be a more than worthy leader. Her nest was no longer the easy plunder that it once might have been, not now that it boasted a large and capable army. But she was old now and near to death. Her central thorax, once covered in rich black downy fibre, had now become paper-thin with age. Yet it was not her failing body, but her fading fertility, which signalled the end was finally drawing near. With the weight of age now bearing down heavily upon her, Queen Xitalia cast a resentful gaze across the vast gathering of drones watching on from the embankments of the Grand Hall. The Zymatiri were indeed many, but their eggs were doomed to remain sterile without the seed of the Zyhari elite. So it was then the multi-brained Zyhari, born of imperial eggs, were the foundational strength of every Xicadian nest. Fated to become the Queen's most trusted advisors and protectors, the Zyhari always hatched male and were uniquely individualistic by nature. While Xitalia looked out upon the swarm of Zymatiri drones, waiting expectantly to bear witness to the nest's first ever cycle of life, death, and rebirth, it was her true children, the Zyhari, who gathered around her in a tight and protective bubble. Xitalia's final act of creation was not to gift the nest with one last Zyhari, but to use the last of her fertility to seed the heir to her throne. It was she who now entered the far end of the Grand Hall, the young and virile body of a virginal Xylenian queen. The young heiress had no name other than that of her hatchery ID, so the queen known only as X27, Y42, Z09, afforded herself a small moment to take in the spectacle, before then making her way pensively down the long stretch of corridor towards the throne table, where Xitalia lay seated and waiting. The Zyhari somberly opened a path, allowing the virgin queen to approach. At first blush, it appeared that she held to calm repose. Yet, if you looked closely enough, you could see the lie, as the young Xylenian queen's legs began to shake ever so slightly. The two queens, one as young as the other was old, now met face to face, eyes locked and unflinching.
My most precious of daughters, what I reflect, will I see reflected back, and thus do I become the mirror of my own mind's eye.
The entire gathering now held its breath in deathly anticipation of the moment.
My most radiant of mothers, what I see reflected, will I reflect back, and thus do I become the mind of my own mother's mirror.
The young queen's voice betrayed not the slightest hint of fear, and Xitalia could not help but feel just the smallest whisper of regret she would never get to see her daughters rise to greatness. X 27, Y 42, Z 09 now rose up on her four hind legs, opening her limbs wide like a flower surrendering to the sun. With tension hanging thickly in the air, Queen Xitalia lifted herself up heavily, creating a distorted mirror image of old to young, young to old. The Xihari elite then reared up reflexively, obscuring any view of the sacred ritual unfolding. A sharp, piercing cry now echoed forth throughout the grand hall, immediately followed by something vastly more haunting, a cry that could surely only have come from Queen Xitalia herself. As the hall quickly fell to a deathly silence, the Xihari elite returned back to the floor, revealing Xitalia's corpse where the Virgin Queen had stood just scant moments prior. Xitalia's limbs now lay splayed out at unnatural angles, and a dark ooze ran from somewhere beneath her motionless body. The dead queen's mandibles twitched sporadically, and one of her eyes remained stubbornly open as it stared sightlessly off into the distance. X 27, Y 42, Z 09 sat poised upon Xitalia's throne, under the thrall of a viral trance. Fine beads of sweat began to form on her brow as she quickly succumbed to a fever. Queen Xitalia's carcass lay dead at her feet. This much could not be denied. Yet, as she looked down at her own lifeless body, she was consumed with a profound sense of grief. Fragments of memories lost now stormed the gates of her thoughts, and hopes, dreams, and nightmares drowned her innocence in a whirlpool of lust. My soul consumed by a virus, spoke the terror that gripped at her heart. I swear that I'll hate you forever, she whispered through the tears on her face. Yet, like the collapsing cascade of a dam, the onslaught of an insatiable appetite continued to consume and corrupt every thought that it touched. Fear and confusion inexorably gave way to a blinding storm of triumph, and the deflowered young queen could only helplessly watch on, as the sense of her own self receded ever backwards into the darkness of her hopelessly shrinking mind. Very soon then, there would be nowhere left to run, leaving only the abyss. Be brave, my little child. I promise to catch you when you fall. Queen Xitalia whispered deliriously to herself, moments before watching her daughter tumble into the void. Finally, mercifully, the pain and terror were gone, and the Queen was now left wondering what exactly all the fuss had been about. She gradually began to collect her thoughts until everything began to make sense. Oh, of course, that was her, not me. And it was all over now, the poor little thing. Still, at least the young Xilenian queen only had to die once, unlike herself. Witnessing one's own death was quite the harrowing experience, and not something she at all looked forward to having to endure again any time soon. The Queen, after days of fever-induced madness, looked down at the decomposing body and understood it was no longer her that lay dead at her feet, even if she clearly recalled watching herself die. Perhaps somewhat deflatingly, she noted the grand hall was now virtually empty, save for her own children, some of whom were already noticing that her fever had broken. Although Xitalia had been left badly depleted, her new body felt impossibly good. After countless years of aching joints and hopelessly dulled senses, she had all but forgotten what it meant to feel this alive. Even so, cannibalizing her own daughter's mind, as she quite literally ate it alive, had been more than a little regrettable. Yet this was just the way it was, the way it had always been, and Xicadia willing, always would be. In spite of this rather sobering thought, Xitalia's mandibles twitched up to form a most radiant smile.
Rise and rejoice, my children, for your queen has returned as Electial. I am Xitalia, reborn.
The newly crowned Xylectial queen cast a distasteful glance downwards at the putrid, rotting body. It smelt revoltingly bad, and a single accusing eye seemed to stare unwaveringly back at her. She wondered if, in the future, they might break with tradition and dispose of the carcass before the transition was complete. Yet even as she considered the possibility, she knew full well such details of passage were sacrosanct and not subject to change. Well, little matter, for in the end it was an infinitesimally small price to pay for the gift of immortality. As Xitalia now very gingerly lifted herself away from the imperial throne, she could not help but feel mildly offended and ashamed of her old body. The simple fact of the matter was that it smelt appallingly bad, and served only to remind her of death and decay. The newly minted Xylectial queen turned an accusatory gaze upon her most senior Xihari general.
For the love of Xicadia, get that stupid look off your face and find someone to clean this mess up. Well, what are you waiting for? Do it now, you idiot.